up there to satisfy yourself, to make you happy. You're doing your own thing, you keep promising. All the while there's nothing around us changing. But you're living mighty high, anything you can buy. So you don't give a damn about if we live or die. But the rebels are coming again. This time
صاغي نية اسمع ما تنام غني في روحي روحي منسية يا صاغي نية اسمع ما تنام نار جاهل تكفي فيا كلمة علاش تدفع فيا نار جاهل تكفي فيا كلمة علاش تدفع فيا بس ما تبكيني بس ما تنسيني بالنية ليلي ما عليهم لام بس ما تبكيني بس ما تنسيني بالنية ليلي ما عليهم لام روحي فني ولع فيا سكرت الموت تعذب فيا نار جاهل تكوي فيا كلمة علاش تدفع فيا
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I am very pleased and honored to be in community virtually and very likely globally, both with a lot of my cohorts, colleagues, comrades who I've known for many years as we continue to build on an important conversation and movement. Palestine is getting free. That is the title of tonight's convening. And I have the great privilege of hosting. My name is Stephen Satterfield. I am the founder of Whetstone Media, which is a food media company and magazine dedicated to global food origins and culture. I'm also the host of Netflix's High on the Hog. And I will very soon be making an introduction to all the homies who will be presenting this evening. But I first would like to ground a little bit more of the work that I do and my own personal ideology in a way that I hope connects it to the material and the ideas that we'll be covering this evening. For me, I think the movement around origin is a movement of reclamation. And I think that is a crucial means of understanding. Reclamation is what impacted communities impacted by white supremacy, communities impacted by colonization, communities impacted by disproportionate abuse and use of power. We see erasure and displacement both on the land and also in narrative, in culture, as fundamental to systems of power, perpetuating that power. And so this movement, as all movements are, necessarily rooted in the need to reclaim power, reclaim our presence in history, in the instances in which it has been erased and obfuscated with intention by those in power. I invite you all to really consider the areas in your own life in which you have seen communities who lack power also be able to advocate for themselves in their own stories. You don't see it. And so really it's this absence, this displacement, as we say, like getting free, the liberation. Liberation is rooted in reclamation. Reclamation is rooted in origin. It is place-based, it is memory-based, and it is about those who lack power advocating for themselves and reclaiming the power of our narratives collectively. That is why this evening, this movement and this teach-in is an intersectional event organized by Palestinian, Black, Indigenous, Boricua, Jewish, and Asian American family. We have been in many ways working together, Kim, and working more broadly around matters of community building and resistance and reclamation. And specifically, we are now continuing a conversation that began, I think, in 2018, when many of us came together as colleagues and professionals in the world of culinary arts to ask a prominent chef to reconsider an invitation to Israel in the name of so-called culinary diplomacy. So we'll talk about that as well, but I just want to ground our convening in years of work. And I would like to express gratitude to all of you who are presenting tonight, that I'm lucky enough to call friends, homies, comrades. And I appreciate you inviting me to share this liberatory and educational space. So that's enough about me. I'm gonna pass it off to the homies, and let's start with Amani Amat. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to start with Carlos. Carlos Baca, my bad, Carlos.
That's good. I would have preferred she went first anyway.
Sorry,
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a hard one to follow up there after Steven's words. But I'm Carlos Baca. I am both Southern Ute and Dene. I'm the founder of Taste of Native Cuisine, as well as co-founder of the I Collective and Fourth World Farm. Looking at this, I'm sitting here looking at a screen with all these beautiful faces here, and it's like this really contemplating the meaning of intersectionality, right? And like what is true movement in the commons, right? And like what does it mean for us to navigate colonialism and navigate white supremacy together, right? It's a really heavy load, it's something that we wake up with every day. There's not one of us on here that doesn't wake up every day knowing that there's potential for violence against us and our people, right? And definitely a real ongoing commitment to genocide against our people. And so being able to sit down and reflect with my brothers and sisters here is it's a great honor and a privilege, and thank you all very much. And I'll pass the mic to
Tara.
Hi, I vowed and promised to everybody that is with me on this call, and to myself mostly, that I would speak very little, because I think that the voices of others here are the most important tonight. I am here in solidarity with everybody that is tuning in, and that, as we have shared, comes from many places. I actually was introduced to a lot of people that are here today through the 2017 Allied Media Conference, when Mapensi Nono and I came as part of a 20-person or 20-some person delegation from Boriken to Detroit. And as part of that, we were invited by OERA to participate in Recipes of Resilience. And that really introduced me to the work of everybody here. And for all of these years now, since then, and through many different types of disasters and struggles, we have remained in contact. And I just want to, give out a shout out and gratitude to everybody. For me, this was very important because months after that Detroit meeting of these beautiful people, Puerto Rico experienced Hurricane Maria. And on top of that, right, up until this day, we continue to fight for the decolonization and even recognition of the fact that we are a US colony. And so that's a little bit of where I come in. I am part of the collective of El Departamento de la Comida, or the Department of Food. We are a small yet very ambitious collective that is in support of food safety in Boriquen. I am also part of Otra Cosa, which is a queer collective land project. And ever since that hurricane, a lot of people that are also on the screen took out of their lives and supported us. And I think that those actions of supporting each other have continued ever since. So I'm very grateful to be here. And I'm going to pass the mic on to Clancy.
Thank you. For my introduction or reason why I am here and in solidarity with all of you and with Palestine and Palestinians, I'm going to read two pieces. One is a reflection I wrote in 2017, immediately after visiting Palestine, and probably shortly before the event we did in 2017, Asymmetrical Table, in protest of the food festival in Tel Aviv. So here goes. I've been thinking a lot about love. I'm the daughter of a minister, so bear with me. I've been thinking a lot about love. I've been wanting to dwell on love. I just read this great piece on expanding one's love to encompass more than just a few. The conference I went to was about just that, love thy neighbor. That's pretty much what Christianity comes down to. That's what Jesus taught. Yet when you visit the place where Jesus was born, you're seeing the opposite of loving thy neighbor. Jesus was born in a place called Bethlehem, and that town is in the West Bank, an area that has been walled off from neighboring lands. The people who live in Bethlehem or any other part of the West Bank are walled in. They have to have permits to come and go. Not everyone gets a permit. Even people with permits can only be outside of the wall within certain hours, usually 12 hours. They live under a curfew. They are human beings. If you go to visit Bethlehem or other places in the West Bank and you leave and go to the airport in Tel Aviv, you're asked where you were. If you say you went to Bethlehem, you may be pulled over and questioned further. We were. Nothing bad happened. We said we were on vacation. We said the number of days we were in Israel. We did not say anything about Palestine. And that's part of the lesson of this trip. Don't say anything about Palestine. Don't see Palestine. Don't say it exists. Don't speak to Palestinians. Don't call Palestinians Palestinian. Call them Arabs. Don't learn about the nuances and complexities and different histories of the people sharing this land. Don't learn about neighbors. I listened to Palestinians and Israelis and Israeli Palestinians and internally displaced people. Maybe the biggest lesson from this trip was learn to listen. There are so many stories, so many complex and difficult and uncomfortable stories and lived experiences. There is so much history, so much to piece together and to try to make sense of. Listening is a small first step. Then there's the larger, more challenging step of loving thy neighbor. Whether you are atheist, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, agnostic, etc., what does it look like to love your neighbor? What does it look like to love a person who is not your lover or your kin? Are we up to the task? The other piece, it's super short, but it's more directly related to how I link my connection to Palestine. I wrote this on Nakba Day. There are a few reasons why I'm interested in Palestine and feel connected to the struggles of Palestinians. First, my parents, who are both Black, were born and raised in the South, Jim Crow South, and they were active in the civil rights movement as students. When I was a kid growing up in Atlanta, my parents were active in the anti-apartheid movement. They introduced me to the concept of boycotting products, such as Coca-Cola, that were supportive of the apartheid regime in South Africa. I learned about the importance of social justice work from my parents. Fast forward to high school, and I was chosen to participate in a cultural exchange trip for 12 students, 6 Jewish students and 6 African-American students, to go on a trip to Senegal, the Gambia, Israel, New York, and Philadelphia, Mississippi, where civil rights activists Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were killed in 1964. This was my first trip to Israel, and it was a very pro-Israel trip with little or no discussion or interaction with Palestinians. In college, I learned more about Palestine. I attended Columbia University while Edward Said was still alive and teaching there. I studied Arabic. I worked at the American Friends Service Committee in their Middle East program and focused specifically on the issue of Palestinian refugees and the right of return. But the most recent connection I have with Palestine is an educational trip I took in 2017 to Palestine, specifically Bethlehem, Hebron, Jerusalem, and Nazareth, and also Syria. I visited a security checkpoint at 5 a.m. at the wall to enter and leave the West Bank. I saw the daily ordeal that ordinary Palestinians have to go through just to go to work and felt shame for ever complaining about my commute. I learned about the Balfour Declaration, which started the whole mess in Palestine in 1917. I met Palestinians who lived through the Nakba, or the catastrophe. I visited refugee camps and held the house keys that belonged to Palestinians who were expelled from their homes. In short, I saw what apartheid looks like. As a Black person in the US, I see a parallel in experiences of being stripped of rights and having one's movement policed, of being treated as less than equal and having one's humanity disregarded. Nakba means the catastrophe and refers to the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes starting in 1948. It continues today. Please don't turn a blind eye to what's happening in Palestine and Israel now. I will turn the mic over to, oh snap.
Me.
Him,
I
yeah.
wanted to make it a little easier. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Thank you, everyone, so far. I know we're here gathered to talk about, share, educate about something that is deadly serious and urgent and vital. And I feel that deeply. And I also feel so much gratitude to be in this room. And I'm just going to continue on the gratitude parade that folks have shared thus far. And I give a lot of thanks to be in rooms like these and to have been invited into rooms like these. Pardon the call, but several years ago now, a few of the friends who are now teachers, mentors, and people I'm so grateful to call comrades called me in. They invited me in to be part of this kind of work. And I realized this is the path that I needed to walk on. And in the time since then, I've been so grateful to have met the other folks into this room and to have been able to build and organize in spaces like Allied Media Conference, at Food Book Fair, through FIG, the Food Justice Collective that I'm now part of and a co-director of, and Asymmetrical Table and so many other events, and hopefully beyond this one, many, many more. And for me, I'm slowing down. I'm going to talk calmly. I'm a Gemini and driven very much by emotion. But just to say, in my previous life, I was a writer. I was really good at talking the talk. And what gratitude to be able to learn what it really means to walk the walk and to walk alongside other people. And that's why I'm here. And I'm, again, feeling so much love to be in this room and to be continually learning with everyone here. And I'm going to pass it over to a dear, dear friend and teacher, Aura Wise.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the gratitude parade. That'll be the name of our next virtual event, or the thing we do once we get to be in person. So thank you again, all friends and comrades and teachers of mine. I'm Aura Wise. I'm the executive director of Sky High Farm in the Hudson Valley. And I am also co-founder of FIG, Food Issues Group, which is the food justice group that Kim is now co-directing, and have been able to connect with all of these incredible teachers and creators and organizers over the past several years, as they've all said, doing work to build bridges between our struggles and our communities. I was born in Jerusalem, and I was raised to believe that it was my homeland, while being raised to actually learn about the history of settler colonialism and land theft, genocide, and slavery on this land. The parallels were not made. I was raised by a community of different kinds of Jewish communities here in the US who treated Israel with an exceptionalism. We didn't hold Israel accountable to the principles of justice and equity and freedom that we claimed to be committed to here. So when I returned there on my own when I was 18 years old, I found myself working with the Jahalin Bedouin, a semi-nomadic Semitic people indigenous to that whole area, and realized that where I was working with them every day was a reservation, that they had been forced out of their original lands in the Negev desert because the Israeli government and military declared it a closed military zone, and then found themselves and were forced to flee to the West Bank. And then in 1967, found themselves once again under Israeli military control. And when I connected with this tribe, they were forced to live on a barren hill about 500 meters from Jerusalem's largest city dump, and had been forced to become sedentary rather than nomadic because Israel was making room for more illegal Israeli settlements around them. And the classroom that I was teaching in was a metal corrugated iron shipping crate that was what the government provided them as housing. So it was there that these connections became clear to me, that the displacement and the occupation, and of course then the disruption of foodways and lifeways, the connections between here and there became so apparent. And I embarked on a journey of unlearning the Zionism that I had been taught, and deconstructing my identity and reconstructing a new one based on entirely new foundations. And that included seeing how settler colonialism in Palestine, that was being claimed to be done in my name, in the name of my so-called people, was designed to, while we claimed to love the land, actually was designed to destroy the land, to carve it up, to build apartheid walls, to bulldoze ancient buildings, to uproot ancient trees, not to mention, of course, terrorize, displace, murder, and expel the indigenous peoples of that land that we claimed is beloved. So I committed myself to that land, just not in the way I was trained to. And I also committed myself seeing the ways that occupation, the Israeli military occupation, is specifically designed to prevent the flow of Palestinian goods, to keep people from Palestinians who did manage to somehow stay on their farmland, to keep whatever they produce from making its way to Palestinian markets, and then flooding the Palestinian market with Israeli processed foods that then are stored in Israeli produced refrigerators, and so on and so forth. And of course, we see that here, and we see that in Puerto Rico, which our comrades here have taught me so much about, literal captive markets, right? And so seeing the way that the oppressors and empire use the same playbook, and they use these, Israeli police, police here in the United States, New York City, where I am, and many, many other cities throughout the United States, get trained by the Israeli military. So they are using unified tactics for ethnic cleansing, for captive markets, for control, for erasure. And so we need unified tactics, of course, as we here all know, for the resistance, for supporting each other's sovereignty struggles. And so the last thing I'll say about why I'm here is I am dedicated to doing the work that I need to do as the child of immigrants to this land that I am not indigenous to. And privileged by the settler colonial society I came into. And I am also dedicated to doing the work to get my people's boot off the neck of the original people of Palestine. And I know that, yes, I need to do the work for transformation within my community, and also too, at the same time, there are more of us than them. So building these bridges between these movements across the globe, movements led by refugees and migrants and indigenous peoples, are the movements that can, if we build effective bridges like we're trying to do, all of us here in this digital space, can outnumber them. So I'm grateful for the comrades here, because the food sovereignty movement can be a real backbone to the larger struggle for sovereignty here, there, and everywhere. And thank you, Stephen, for weaving us together. So I'll pass the mic to you.
So beautiful. Y'all heard it all right there. A lot of talent, a lot of intellectual horsepower on the line right now. Ora gave us a nice setup into conversations around food and sovereignty. That is the basis for all of our relationships. And I think one thing that I'm absorbing right now is that movements of sovereignty, these reclamation movements, are often, if not always, led by those communities that are impacted. And as someone who has absorbed enough of the world's history, I don't know about y'all, but for me, I want to be squarely aligned with those people who are fighting for their own power and agency, because history teaches me that that's where the moral authority lies. And having been a byproduct of a class and a race of people who have been negatively and disproportionately impacted by this racialized hierarchy that we were born into in a country that we were brought to forcibly, I have to align myself in the name of my ancestors to these movements of sovereignty and reclamation. So I'm sitting exactly where I want to be sitting, and I'm eager to hear from Amani and Carlos about y'all's respective relationship to food sovereignty and your work, and help ground and Tara as well, and help ground us in what this intersectional movement looks like from the perspective of food sovereignty. Anyone can.
Hi. Okay, hi. Hi, I'm Amani. I'm a Palestinian person living on Turtle Island. I'm so grateful to be here in this virtual room with all these people that I feel so honored to know and to learn from, to grow with and be mutually supportive with and in community with, by being there for one another's struggles, but also being there to learn from one another's creative forms of resistance and resiliency in the different ways that we can offer that to one another in our own communities. For this first part, I want to lay down kind of some groundwork, some more like facts and figures of what this apartheid looks like on the ground in Palestine for the people who are living there, and how it affects their, their physical and geographical kind of implications related to their foodways and the land relationships, and how that affects the ability of culture to perpetuate. One of the first things I think is really important to understand that a lot of people don't know is that when the Oslo Accords of 1995 went into effect, which they were only supposed to remain effective for about 5 years, they divided the West Bank territory into 3 different areas: Area A and B, which technically were under control of the Palestinian Authority, and Area C. And what that looks like geographically is areas A and B kind of end up looking like a bunch of disjointed islands, this archipelago, whereas Area C kind of envelops everything. And Area C is under military rule, under the umbrella of the Israeli occupation. What that means is that Israel has full control over the ability of the people in those areas, Area C, to, under the guise of security, people are unable to build, put in infrastructure, develop land, or decide how they're able to use the land. While simultaneously, Israel is perpetually building these illegal settlements within Area C. All of the illegal settlements that exist are within Area C, and they kind of just continue to get built unfettered since, I think, just after 1967. So this archipelago of areas A and B is this division and separation of Palestinians, which mirrors the fractures of diaspora and refugee populations spread all over the earth after the seismic disruption of the Nakba that Clancy had mentioned earlier, or the catastrophe, which began in 1948, 73 years ago. But within these areas, Palestinians are prevented from building, planning, or improving any of the existing systems for the population who's doubled since the Oslo Accords in 1995, while Israeli settlements exist in an inverse universe. In the settlements, there are no restrictions. There are massive swaths of land that are annexed and decreed for farming. There's room for expansion. There is a large portion of land that is untouchable so that it could be nature preserves, or national parks. They're often parks built over the former grounds of Palestinian villages that were destroyed in the Nakba. And Israel also claimed control of all of the water resources of the Palestinian territories in 1967. So the implications of this are that the traditional population, who were farmers traditionally, don't have access to the land or the water or one another, the community that previously existed, while simultaneously they're existing in these fractured areas surrounded by settlements and surrounded by the roads that are built to intersect communities and villages, keeping them apart while bringing together all of the Israeli settlements and their agricultural projects. Going along with the water issue, Israel controls about 90% of the water resources in the West Bank, while Israeli settlers use 6 times more water than the 3.1 million Palestinians in the West Bank do. And over in Gaza, only about 10% of the population has access to clean water that's potable, and more than 96% of the water there in the aquifers is unconsumable, forcing them to drink and use trucked-in water. And in keeping with that, although the Mediterranean isn't a potable water source, it is a source of economic security, relaxation, recreation, but a lot of it is also dangerous and unusable because of sewage dumping and trash dumping that Israel does in Palestinian areas. Again, with water springs, which are a traditional center of life for Palestinian people and culture and communities, and like lore and cultural traditions, are also being drained under the earth by Israeli pumping to settlements. And along with that, above ground, a lot of these springs have been weaponized by Israeli settlers who intimidate and commit acts of violence against local people who try to access these traditional waterways. So land, water, segregation, and then furthermore, in the agricultural sector, apartheid looks like 85% of the grazing lands Palestinians do not have access to within the West Bank, while the prime grazing lands are completely open and available to Israeli settler use. And then furthering that, the housing shortage created by illegal settlements, which are all built in open areas, and the general conditions of apartheid, most of the land that's still available for agricultural use and would be better suited to that has to be used for residential construction, leaving only 20% of the land that's actually cultivatable available for farmers to use. So in a community that's traditionally agriculturally based and historically agriculturally based, people are not only being psychologically and spiritually divorced from the land, they're also prevented from being economically viable in their traditional forms and are unable to provide for their families or their food or medicine or traditional needs. Now, beyond agriculture, foraging and wild plants are a very important part of the Palestinian diet and culture and traditions. And Israel has gone so far as to pass legislature preventing Palestinians from accessing these plants or harvesting these plants under the guise of ecological conservation and plant protection. But simultaneously, while preventing the indigenous population from utilizing or accessing these lands in ways that have clearly been sustainable for generations, Israel privately farms or grows these plants and brands them and sells them to foreign countries and within Israel as an Israeli product. So this is kind of one of the first ways that we can start to see how culturally culinary appropriation is a type of violence that's more insidious and more nefarious, and a claiming of another person or culture's identity as your own while not respecting or having any regard for the implications and the violences that has on the indigenous population. And then from there, I'd like to talk about how difficult it is to organize and participate in mutual aid on the ground in Palestine or even in diaspora under these conditions. Because though we're not going to talk about it a lot today, Israel very much is a surveillance and police state, and it's very difficult to function, even as we saw in the most recent uprising, where so many people were getting shadow banned or silenced on social media. Existing there and trying to do those things within the fracturing of areas A, B, and C, and Jerusalem, and the Palestinians who exist within the boundaries of 48 and in Gaza, it's quite difficult for people to be connected. So Palestinians in general find themselves and ourselves in this liminal space where our past is denied, little known, or willingly ignored by many, and our present exists within the confines of physical and psychological restrictions. So for those on the ground, continuing to exist and fight in whatever ways they can through this active oppression of the settler colonial occupation is a full-time effort and really requires a lot of support from people outside of the Palestinian community. The physical fractures of division and segregation that keep us apart, struggling in the face of conditions created by like ongoing displacement and dispossession of our land, our culture, our people, and just appropriation of our identity, really are pretty significant impediments to our ability to provide mutual aid to one another in tangible ways and to organize in tangible ways. The structures of apartheid and militarized settler colonial occupation are designed to fracture and separate, whether on the ground or in diaspora. And part of our struggle and our ongoing resilience is in creating the space to imagine these realities where this structure no longer exists with these conditions. And I think that Indigenous people have always held the power to envision futures beyond settler colonial paradigms as we existed prior to their arrival. And I think that so much of what we're working on now in the struggle for Palestinian liberation is this explicitly anti-colonial action, but the aftermath and how we get there is decolonization in practice. It goes beyond the rhetoric of talking about decolonization. Like, what does a framework built from the destruction of the settler colonial machine look like when it's transformed into a new future? And in that, I think I'd like to end on a more positive note, or a positive note, in talking about some of the ways that Palestinians have found to resist in spite of the fracturing that has happened. And I think one of the most well-known and more recent projects is by Vivian Sansour, who runs the Palestinian Heirloom Seed Library in Beit Sahur outside of Bethlehem. And, her project is incredible. It's something she set out to do, I believe, over a decade ago, where she started seeking out and saving these seeds that were of Palestinian varieties, a lot of which were thought to have been lost, most of which have developed over thousands of years to the conditions of the area, a lot of them to drought conditions, and are incredible, tiny capsules of resilience. And her work has been to find these seeds, save them, and to redistribute them to farmers and communities who are then continuing the traditions and sometimes relearning the traditions of how to grow these seeds in our ways. So these are really important things that it's hard to do, but somebody's doing, and it's very important. Along with Vivian, there are a few fair trade associations like Canaan and some other local farm projects and mutual aid organizations that exist on a more village or area-based basis. And then outside of Palestine, there are quite a few Palestinians who are doing culinary projects or writing cookbooks or opening restaurants in the face of Zionist backlash, like Reem, my co-speaker on here, and generally raising their voices, which viewed through this lens, you can easily understand is a revolutionary act. It's really putting yourself on the line to, you know, plant that flag and say who you are and name what you're doing as what it is, and taking it back from those who would rather you take it, or rather you let them take it. Along with that, culinary boycotts, which is a big thing I'd like to talk about today, is a really effective tool. A few years ago, as some of my peers have mentioned, we put together the Asymmetrical Table, which was a counter protest to the Israeli roundtables. And that was a very effective and creative way to call attention to culinary appropriation as a tool for violence. So I think that those are kind of ways that Palestinians have found, and Palestinian comrades have found, to be in support of Palestinian liberation around food. And allies continue to use food as a way to talk about Palestinian liberation, but also to practice decolonization beyond rhetoric. And I think I would like to pass the mic to my favorite brother, Carlos Baca.
Hey, thank you for your words, Bonnie. It's really really telling of the story of colonization, right? Like if we look towards here where we're at, you know, and we're looking at 429 years of colonization that have culminated in that exact circumstance for your people, right? You know, like those tactics were really born and bred here, and have their roots in the oppression of the indigenous peoples of these lands, right? Kind of navigate back into, you know, that realm, and like what food warfare looks like in this space. You know, you can go back 500 years to the Spaniards outlawing amaranth because they thought the people thought it was more powerful than Jesus, right? Which tells you more about the indigeneity and the respect for those plant relatives that help maintain your way of being and your way of connectivity with the land you're on. You know, the fact that was continuing to cultivate that relationship was punishable by death. You know, it's pretty heavy duty. And then you can follow those routes outward. You know, you can go to the mid 1800s and the slaughter of the bison, with the theory that every dead buffalo is a dead Indian, and also how that's an actual true reflection that they saw that. You know, the populace of our bison relatives and us both went to the brink of extinction, right? And you further that out in the East Coast with slash and burn campaigns. Here in the Southwest, same thing. Kit Carson going into our sacred valleys and burning down orchards, cutting down all the orchards and burning all the food, right? And just it's been said plenty of times in history, but hungry people can't think for themselves to fight, right? If all you can think of is survival, you don't have a means to fight back. And looking through that evolution to where indigenous communities are in this place and time, and the way that we've taken back to the land, right? And a lot of, there's a lot to be discussed in that whole conversation. The difference between a tribe that was moved from the East Coast and thrown in Oklahoma, right? It's like, for all y'all that are on the East Coast know how rich the biodiversity is there, and how long the growing season is there, right? And to imagine taking a people and putting them in nothing, right? To where their food, their seeds that they brought with them didn't grow year after year after year, right? Until some of those seeds became extinct, and some of those seeds were thought to be extinct. It's just really such a huge reflection for all of us, I think there's a mural. I love this connectivity. There's a mural at Soulfire Farm, and it has seeds being woven into a woman's hair, right? And in my time there visiting, I didn't realize that there was such a connectivity between the indigenous peoples of this planet, right? That is, as women and men were being brought in captivity from Africa, they had their seeds right here. And it's the same thing that our women and people did here. They sewed their seeds into their buckskin. They put it in their hair, So there's all these huge reflections that we can, look at each other and know that we come from these places, right? That our people have all had to deal with the white man and their manifest destiny. It's there's a lot of pain in there, and looking to right now and what the resurgence of rootedness and indigeneity is in our communities is really, really deep and really vast. Everything from coastal tribes in the Pacific Northwest and Great Lakes tribes starting their own fisheries to actually being leaders in conservation efforts, right? That all these cages put on top of us as a means of control, we're able to maneuver within them to actually create the systems and maintain our indigenous systems, more importantly. That when their systems failed, they had to come to us. And this happens repetitively, I think that, I guess like what it all culminates to, like I'm trying to keep I can ramble about this all day, I'm just trying to keep it in our time slot. I think what it culminates to, we're blessed to have Amani and Aura come out here and visit the farm recently. And we were able to put seeds in the earth together. And while we were doing that, the whole time I was thinking about it, and I was reflecting this to them while it was happening, was I was really thinking about what does it mean for the two of them to be putting seeds in the earth together, and what does it mean for those seeds being planted in an indigenous space. And while we're doing this, I mean, mind you, we get like 9 to 11 inches of water here a year. That's it. And we're in our 22nd year of drought right now. So we don't even get that. And while we're out there planting, these storms kept coming and driving us out of the field. You know, it was such... These massive winds would kick up, and these just massive rains were cold and hitting like hail, you know. And I thought, if that's not a look in the mirror and a reflection of reality, I don't know what is, right? The moral of the story is, you know, this conversation and being here with you guys, that's what it's about. You know, and as we're moving forward and we're creating these foundations, it really does boil down to becoming rooted again, because that's all indigeneity is. Right? Indigeneity is being one with your place. Right? It's knowing all your plant relatives. It's knowing all your animal relatives. It's knowing your geography. It's knowing all this space and how you engage your commitment to it. I always refer to the land as like, you need to have the same responsiveness to the land as you do as your lover, because it's that deep of a commitment. And all these chances that we get to come together, and I always say our words are seeds. You know, we're offering people a seed when we're sitting here speaking, and with all the people in this room, we're actually, you know, cultivating an entire field. So, blessings, and I'm gonna pass this to Tara.
I just want to appreciate and take a moment, because I think you just said some very important things. And it just brought me to thinking how I got here. I spent the weekend supporting an elder poet who moved back to her family's farm in the high mountains of Maricao. And together, she and I have been for the past few months just drawing and designing and now building a solar dehydrating compost toilet. And I just came down from the mountains. It's been raining so much, and just moving from one ecosystem 3 hours away and then passing into my farm. And arriving, and the same rains also came through our mountains, and I just harvested my first plantains from the land that we've been on for the past few years. And then I arrived here and I'm able to speak to all of you with 18 eggs that my neighbor gave me, the same neighbor who is teaching me everything about plants, because she and her husband have lived there their whole lives and share seeds with me and have become my family. And I just walked in with obviously a lot of urgency, but also with hands full of bananas and plantains and eggs. And I walked to a balcony with medicinal plants that other people have shared with me. And I get to just share space with all of you, and I really appreciate that. I guess I'm going to be very brief because I know that time is important for what's coming. Puerto Rico translates into rich port, and that has been the strategy ever since the Spaniards landed here and then the US occupied. It is very difficult to speak about colonialism in Puerto Rico because the word colony was also erased and replaced in 1952, so that we can also put it into context with what was going on in Palestine at the same time, with the words Commonwealth or unincorporated territories. And that is also a way to really switch and confuse, no, and just erase a lot of the history that Puerto Ricans have been through. Most of us are now not living in Boriquen, which is the Taino name for this archipelago of 90 some islands, not just one. And 14% of the population in the past 3 years has been forced to leave. Some say because of natural disasters, but we all know that this is because of the privatization of pretty much everything. I am 37 years old, and I have a great fear that all of my friends and people that I grew up with who have been forced to leave are not going to be able to afford to come back. And that is the reality now, as the US government, in conjunction with the local government, have been awarding tax incentives, AKA tax evasion, to anybody that is non-local to these islands. And basically what we have right now is post a pretty, big human disaster as a not so good response to natural occurrences like hurricanes, doing land grabbing and a lot of forced maneuvers in the name of aid. Now our electric and water companies, as well as our educational system, are being either shut down or completely privatized. Right now, we continue to be one of the largest GMO seed producers for the United States. But like everything, Puerto Rico is meant to just produce things that are exported. And that is something that we live with every day, and something that I feel is also very important when it comes to understanding that, yes, as Aura shares and a lot of people here, it's very difficult to free yourself if you're unable to feed yourself. And right now we're in a moment where a lot of people do not have access to that land that not only can they feed themselves, but where they can heal, or where they can unlearn a lot of the things that at least my generation was taught, which was working with the land does not get you anywhere. And working with the land is not part of the American dream that we have been fed for so many years. Right now, the farming that is going on in Puerto Rico on a mass scale is FEMA incentivized or funded solar farming, which is made to all just be under the term of renewable energy. When Puerto Rico, it has been proven, has enough roofs to have every resident control their own energy from the sun, which, as many may know, is, abundant. We are being bought out and pretty much invaded as our people are having to leave by a lot of people that want to come and vacation and have their tax incentives and good time over here. I am not somebody that grew up as part of the agricultural community. I am third generation from the city. My grandparents were taught not to know anything about their history. And I am actually very grateful for some pretty bad circumstances that have allowed me to return to land. A lot of organizations in Puerto Rico understand that growing food is a direct and indivisible practice that goes along with the decolonization of our people, our culture, our history, and our land. And when I learned and I met a few people that were here a few years ago, I was still learning about actual freedom fighters that I was taught were terrorists or rebels. And these political prisoners, these people that really struggled for the liberation of our islands, also recognized that the Palestinian struggle was essential and important to the liberation of Boriquen. And they spoke about this. Lolita Lebron from her cell with her lawyers, the ongoing conversations with the United Nations, Rafael Cancel Miranda, and all of the political prisoners knew that this needed to be a joined front. And they were also asking for the world to recognize that Puerto Rico is a colony, and therefore we do not want to answer to our colonizers, and that we have the right to defend our land. And they also recognized throughout the years and to present day that it was very important to be in solidarity with the liberation and Palestine freeing, right, itself, with the support of all the other colonies around the world. And I really just want to bring that up, especially, you know, in Puerto Rico, we're full of problems, and so is everybody else. And it is very difficult to reach information and to reach history. And so it has been really important for me to learn the history of the freedom fighters of the home that I live in, and that they were in collaboration and conversation with the freedom fighters for Palestine and for many other struggles in Latin America, in Asia, and around the world. And I think that food sovereignty really brought me to that point to be able to understand, that we are in this for many reasons. And we are also in this for many people, not just our own. I also said earlier that I was going to shut up to give space for others. So I'm going to do that now. I really just want to say one thing. There are many groups in Puerto Rico, as well as many Palestinians that moved to Puerto Rico. And so anybody that is interested in connecting, in learning more, whether it be from the diaspora of Puerto Ricans or aquí, please contact us. And we are here and still figuring it out, because something that has happened is that a lot of our struggles in the past decades have also been very displaced and very distanced. And we're in a moment right now of actually understanding that we have been in this room again and again through our ancestors and through our elders. And now is one of those moments where we really need to rejoin again and get back into conversation. So on that note, I will leave this to, I believe, Stephen.
Yes, gracias, Tara. There's been so much of immense value that has been shared. And I just want to echo a few things as a means of transitioning into our last segment of the evening, which is around movement building and solidarity. Right now, I'm marinating on words as seeds. I'm marinating on us rejoining our ancestors, as Tara just shared with us, being connected to our own histories and identities. I'm meditating on the ways in which our own people perpetuate some of these narratives that keep us down, that keep us displaced, narratives that keep us disconnected to the land and our relationship to it. But mostly what I'm thinking about is the need to build new futures, as we say and as we know, and the need to draw on the wisdom of previous struggles and generation as a means of envisioning the new future, because we can't actualize the new future without a vision for this future. And the future that we want to be a part of, it looks like this. It looks like us being connected to our ancestors and to one another in the name of love and liberation. And it also requires that, in addition to this power, this intersectional power that we are building, that those who hold power, that those who move in community and solidarity, engage those impacted groups, the organizers, the teachers, the activists, the educators who have been holding down this space of liberation and education. It's important that we act in community and in service. And so I hope that this final section provides those opportunities. And as we are saying here, solidarity is a verb, it is active, it's live. So for this final segment, why don't we begin staying in the realm of food and liberation in that framing. We'll begin with Reen, and then also hear from Clancy, Kim, and Amani. So Reen, if you want to just start us off in the name of solidarity.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm just like chills all up and down my arms, just listening to everyone and just understanding the profoundness of this moment and our connectedness, and that a reminder that, you know, seeds are planted, but they don't just grow. It takes time. And I'm reminded of all of the work, that this is a culmination of many, many years and generations of work for us to have the privilege to be here. I was going to sort of answer this question by talking about my origin story as a Palestinian activist and sort of my experience with cross movement building around Palestine. But in just listening to other folks, I actually want to start a little bit earlier to sort of my origin story as an organizer working in Black and Brown communities, because I think that's important as well. What does it mean for a Palestinian in diaspora, you know, by the circumstances, disconnected from my land, trying to understand what my role is, disconnected from this land, and quite frankly, you know. And I think about sort of the two sort of things popped in my mind as I heard people talking. One was going to, so my family is from Gaza, and going to Gaza in 1994, like right after the Oslo Accords, the so-called, you know, peace, and, you know, Gazans are somehow free. And seeing the devastation that my, you know, this little kid from the US was seeing my family in, and just the like trauma of it, and trying to figure out, okay, now where do I go from here? And then a few years later, actually taking a trip, I was a very avid reader of history. I think being born Palestinian, just it's in our blood that we question things. And from a very young age, you know, I had the privilege of having my uncles who are activists, who are telling me stories of being on the front lines and what they faced, right? And going to, I mean, I lived in Massachusetts in the like founding of this country, the beginning of the genocide, and my uncle protesting at Plymouth Rock. So it was like in me. But the moment sort of that changed me was actually going to the Deep South. And I remember walking through Mississippi and some of the most rural parts of Mississippi, and I could have been in Gaza. I could have been in Gaza. It was that stark, the connections that I saw as, I was 16 at the time, and I remember talking to those freedom riders, the folks who've been on the front lines, the freedom riders, the freedom singers, and what they faced to survive. And they could have been my uncles. I mean, the stories were so parallel. And I, from that moment, committed myself to finding a place and working in Black and Brown communities here in the US. And I think through that journey, fast forward 10 years later, as I, experienced the utmost sort of disconnection from myself and depression and all of these things, and from quite literally from food, so like very food ways that kept me surviving. It was organizing in those communities that fed me life, because it connected me to myself as a Palestinian. I didn't know that at the time, but now I understand, sort of an understanding intersectionality, that really what I was doing was fighting for my own liberation through those struggles. Because I understood that I may never go back to my homeland, and so I needed to understand what is home when, the sort of physical concept of home will be a thing. And it is sort of in looking at the history of my people and as Palestinians in diaspora who cannot fight on the front lines with their Palestinian siblings back in Palestine, that we have a responsibility in all the places we're in to do this work, right? In the places that we're in. So flash forward, it's moving here to the Bay. I remember sort of, this was around 20 years ago when, Bush was in power. It was like, 2 years after 9/11, and everything had been disrupted for Arabs in this country. And I remember us being involved in anti-war and anti-imperialist activism. And nobody wanted to touch Palestine. There was a complete dissonance with people's fight on the ground against war and imperialism. They're like, no, Palestine has nothing to do with that. And for me, that was just so ridiculous. It was so clear to me that, our American taxpayer dollars were going to fund control over all of the Arab world, and that Israel was just simply an extension of that. I think that is a misconception of those of us here living in the US, that Israel is its own project, but Israel as a state is a proxy of the US. It is why we fund it $4 billion a year for the last 10 years to do the work that we need to do, or not we, the US government needs to do, to maintain control, not just over people all around the world, but people here, right? It is part of an imperialist project. So you cannot disconnect foreign policy from US policy. And so that was very, very stark. So that's one thing that sort of was very important to me in the work and how to do it. The other thing that I learned from that, a lot of those anti-war activists were white allies. We're not connected to real sort of material struggle. We're not the direct sort of recipients of decades of disinvestments in their cities, right? And that we really needed to organize on the ground around Palestine, that actually the work that I was doing in Black and Brown communities for them to fight, to have a voice in their neighborhoods or in their jobs or any of the campaigns I was working on was actually quite connected to them questioning where the money of their government is going instead of investing right in them. And so that became very clear to me that we needed to start with the communities most impacted by the decades, of violence and disinvestments in communities here. I remember the first backlash we received. This was 20 years ago. I was door knocking, working on a divestment campaign in a small little city right outside of Boston called Somerville, Massachusetts. And the founder was this amazing Black organizer who had been part of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And, you know, we were talking to working class folks, we were talking to Black and brown folks about the issues that mattered to them. We weren't talking about Palestine right away. We were talking about school. We were talking about healthcare. We were talking about food security. And then as soon as we met people where they were at, we started to talk about how does it feel for your city to actually have their monies, the tax dollars that you are paying, directly invested in Israeli bonds, and companies like General Electric and Boeing and Caterpillar, the same companies that are bulldozing olive trees and literally killing Palestinian children. And it became very clear. And we almost won that campaign, the power of the people. I had never seen a city so polarized. And then we saw the right wing, well-resourced, and the backlash, and on the premises that we were anti-Semitic. So this was a thing. And so that was a long time ago, and over the years, I've witnessed, and I've unfortunately been one of them, but I've witnessed my comrades, Palestinians in the fight, try to fight to assert their connections to others in the struggle, to Black and brown communities, to immigrant communities, to LGBTQ communities. We fought over and over again to be seen and to be heard. And it's been through our food, our art, our culture, our politics, our activism, you name it. And some of us have been blacklisted. Some of us have been stripped of our citizenship. Some of us have been jailed. I have people who've spent 8 years in jail, literally for holding a fundraiser for their Palestinian community back home. We've been surveilled. And so this is what we've been up against. And we knew that we needed to build deeper with communities who are facing the same kind of extreme violence and surveillance if we were going to realize our vision for liberation. But there's good news. Even in these 10 years, my restaurant, case in point, I received a huge amount of backlash, and I was amazed by the community, the cross movement building that we had done for 10 years. Jewish Voices for Peace, Critical Resistance, Chicano Moratorium, all these organizations rooted in Black and brown and Jewish and anti-racist white organizations came to my aid. We are in a situation in which Food and Wine gets backlash by Zionist forces and says, you know what, sit down. We're going to double down on our support for Reem because we know what she's doing. That was unfathomable. We couldn't have thought about that 5 years ago. You have people supporting when I was receiving the height of my backlash, I had farmers from Oklahoma sending me personal mail, and I had people who knew nothing about Palestine, just like everyday folks who saw the craziness of white supremacy right there in front of them and said, we want to support your restaurant just because we don't know anything about Palestine, but this is wrong. And so I just think that we are in a different moment now. The world is not what it was 10 years ago, obviously social media, technology, all of these things has helped us, but it has been the deep roots that we have planted, right? That are really rooted in the land to help us when backlash comes, actually make some real changes, I think that, and I know that I'm short on time, so I want to sort of talk about sort of one of the things in cross movement building are sort of in this moment that I think is really exciting, is that, I don't know, I just believe in political jiu-jitsu. Somebody taught me this concept, and that all umpires do fall, And when the oppressor gets so ridiculous, we have a moment to use the might of our oppressor to turn on itself. And I think that's what we're doing here. We're doing it in Palestine, but we're also by showing the connections. I mean, they're not even hiding their connections. You have police forces from Oakland going and visiting Israel to learn how to control the Black population on, BART, for instance. You have the same companies who are building that apartheid wall, investing in the wall on the US-Mexico border. They're not even trying to hide it. So this is a moment for us, especially folks who have an audience, who are people of conscience. And I speak not just as a Palestinian, but as a person of conscience, that I believe that if Palestine gets free, we're all going to get free. It is single-handedly the most just egregious apartheid system that is left here in the world. And it's so entrenched in the US and what the US is doing and and its policies against the people here, that if we free Palestine, we free a lot of folks here. So I will stop there. And I will hand it over to Amani.
I think we're going Clancy.
We're gonna go Clancy first. Okay. Sorry,
Yep, so
I
y'all
got very
can,
into that.
That's all. Apology. We want to give our Palestinian family in particular room to breathe. So no apologies needed. Kimberly and Clancy, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Reem. Reem, Kim, well, I wish I could see, wait, hold on. Okay. I want to apologize to you, Reem. This is related, I think, to what Kim and I are going to talk about in a belated apology, because I think we're going to talk about some of these culinary super pro-Zionist trips to Israel that kind of lure people in because they're free trips and you get to basically have a vacation on the Israeli government's dime. And you reached out to all of us, I think, in being totally disturbed, as I think all of us were, that a colleague was kind of hyping up one of these trips. And I was not aware at the time of the fire you had had. And so I had suggested you reach out to this person. So I just want to apologize for not being ignorant of what was going on in your life. But I think that for me, that's a big deal. Those trips, I went on one as a teenager, not in the culinary sense. It was for like future leaders, but I feel like that's, I feel like one role that non-Palestinian people can have is just to kind of like tap on people's shoulders and say, hey, I need to tell you something. Like I need to break something down to you about the nature of these trips, even if people have already gone on them. But yeah, that's like a random statement, but I think on the topic of what Kim and I are talking about.
Why don't, maybe we can, let's see if the technology will support us and maybe having more of a little bit of a dialogue. So we can talk about how we're building Clancy, Reem, Amani, across community, right? Including about tapping, sometimes not that lightly, on your cousin's shoulder. I'm really about collecting cousins. Sometimes your literal family, sometimes your blood family, sometimes your chosen family. And I think I'll speak specifically as an Asian American woman living here in this place we call America on Turtle Island, as a Taiwanese American woman, a child of immigrants from a place called Taiwan, which is often also regarded as not a country. And also too, I've had to grapple with the history of imperialism and settler colonialism there. And also I know that I've deepened in my understanding of that in being in community with folks like y'all and doing the collective liberation work. And all that to say, I think right now is an incredible time where Asian Americans, if I can speak about Asians in general, are so activated in response to some of the horrific violence against Asian American folks earlier this year, and really as a xenophobic response to the pandemic, but for many other reasons as well. And there is an incredible opportunity for folks who are activated to step into doing the work for their own and also our collective liberation. And to be able to make those connections and to be able to struggle alongside somebody else or support someone else in their struggle is not to negate your own. And it's really important not to negate your own while you're doing that, but to be able to understand that we are all tightly interconnected, and it is systems like white supremacy and imperialism that make us think there is scarcity, but really there is such abundance waiting for all of us, and it can exist, and it does exist for those of us right now in varying ways when we do this work together. And I want to read something, a couple of tweets by Viet Thanh Nguyen, the Vietnamese American writer. And I recommend reading this whole Twitter thread, but I'll just read this part, which is, I feel, really time specific to spring 2021. And he says, right now, in this particular time, even as one branch of Asian American culture goes corporate and representational, another branch follows Edward Said's insights and connects East and Southeast Asian Orientals to Arab Orientals. Hence, to be Asian American is also to decolonize and to align with the Palestinian cause. He says, one cannot be anti-racist without being anti-colonial and decolonizing. For Asian Americans not to see our common cause with other oppressed peoples means that we are not genuinely anti-racist. We're just self-interested. But the thing is, what inspires me and what I remind people and what I invite people into, because so many people have shared with me this knowledge and these resources, so now it's my job to share it out. What I remind people, and I remind myself, that there is a history of Asian Americans that have been anti-racist and anti-colonial and anti-imperialist. Asian Americans have been part of these movements, been part of movements for labor, for Black liberation, for indigenous sovereignty, for Palestine, for Asian lives also. And I think it is really important to remember that we have this history, as Stephen was saying, in order for us to concentrate on building our futures and remember that it's all connected, and we need to do this together, and we have been, and we continue to. And for me personally, in the communities that I move in, I collect my cousins more or less one at a time. We have a lot of conversations in person. There's a lot of DMing that's going on. But I know there are so many different ways to do it. Sometimes you can go more broadly, sometimes more narrow. And personally for me, a lot of the work that I do in sort of in relation to people is a mile deep and an inch wide in my relationships, specifically around this. And also too, just in this specifically, I follow the lead of what Palestinian activists and organizers and my teachers, mentors, and friends are asking for. And I co-sign actions. I invite people to events, ask people to also sign on to open letters, because I know who is leading this movement here, and I'm here to support it.
Amen. I think, is Amani next?
Would you also like to say some more? Clancy?
Clancy?
I think, you know, I feel like I'm a beginner in a lot of ways. I feel like a lot of my solidarity has to do with sharing what I'm learning. Social media plays a big role, just in terms of, I don't know if it's citizen journalism, but just sharing, you know, this is what's happening, or this is my perspective. And also trying to share that you can think critically about things. I mean, a lot of times I get a lot of really troll-like DMs. So kind of trying to challenge that both one-on-one with random trolls, but also trying to challenge that in a wider way, especially within the confines of social media. A goal of mine that I'm nowhere near accomplishing is to kind of do the same trip, the kind of trip that I went on as a teenager to Palestine, to Israel and Palestine, that happened to be very, very, very pro-Israel. I would like to do that for Palestine, for people in food. And so people can kind of I feel like my second trip to Palestine was very much a learning opportunity because I was in direct contact with, and the whole trip was organized by Palestinians. So I would, at some point, huge goal, not happening now, I would like to be able to organize something for people in food, specifically, because I think there's some kind of seductive tourism that's happening that's related to the colonial project that is Israel. And it gets some of our best and brightest people in the food world. So I would like to, I don't know, sometimes it's a one-on-one conversation, but I would eventually, a goal is to create, you know, a small program, even a small trip, just to help people to see this is the other side. This is the reality, you know? But yeah, but I do feel like I'm also mindful of the time passing, and I guess, should I hand the mic to Reem and Amani?
Thank you,
Amani's
Clancy. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Clancy. I appreciate your perspective as a self-proclaimed beginner, even though I do not view you as such. And I do really appreciate you sharing that perspective and idea of a delegation to Palestine. And I think that you're right, that so much of what we're seeing with these trips, these misinformation kind of, I don't know what you would call them kindly, experiences, is just a lack of education on what Palestine is really like. I can't say how many times in my life when I tell people I'm Palestinian that their response is to tell me that maybe they'd like to go, but they've just heard it's so dangerous. So yeah, I think that you're right. I think that there's a lot of space there for people to go and see with their own eyes that the danger doesn't lie with Palestine and Palestinians at all. So in that, I'd like to kind of wrap up my portion of the contribution by talking about culinary appropriation and how that is a major element of ethnic cleansing, and kind of make an informal call for culinary boycott outside and within Palestine. I think that the root of that, for me, it's important to speak on and to recognize the spectrum of violence that exists as a result of the imbalance of power that is oppressor and oppressed, occupier and occupied. Theft of our land, theft of our recipes, our plants, it's violence, and denial of our existence is violence. Refusing to say things are Palestinian is violence. Violence doesn't just look like overt bigotry, hatred, murder, displacement, bombs, physical violence, even though it is also all those things. some of the most insidious forms of violence come from those who present themselves as lovers of peace, who just want to cook, who don't want to be a part of whatever because they see themselves as separate from their identity, without realizing that the privilege afforded to them comes only at the expense and suffering of an entire population for generations. And that only because of that privilege are they able to be in that position to separate themselves from that violence. While our communities don't have that luxury, we exist in these systems because we're forced to. So this covert violence is harder to recognize, and it's harder for people outside of these communities to recognize it. It's harder for the people who are experiencing this violence to point it out. And it's often responded to with gaslighting, minimizing, or denial. So culinary boycotting, much like cultural, product, and academic boycotts, is just another nonviolent form of resistance that targets individuals or organizations that are directly benefiting from the ongoing occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people. And it's a way for people to engage and to illustrate their support in a meaningful way rather than just kind of a verbal passing way. I mean, I think that the way that we've seen people participating recently and sharing on social media, even though that's kind of a newer way of participating that maybe seems frivolous to some, it's an actionable way that people can participate. And you can participate in it by refusing to support these individuals, organizations who are actively participating in ethnic cleansing through appropriation and invisibilization and obfuscation, wrongly naming or taking credit for things and dishes, ingredients, recipes, and culinary traditions or aesthetics that are only a part of their repertoire as a result of their privilege of existing in the role of oppressor. This includes, but isn't limited to, Israeli restaurants who call themselves Israeli but serve food that's traditionally Palestinian, but also extends to places or people who call themselves Mediterranean or Middle Eastern, which are inherently colonial terms that obfuscate the true identity of these things and just kind of lump everyone together as a way of removing our unique individuality. Anything normalizing the state of Israel, like anything that just completely normalizes Israel's existence as this occupying entity, is something that I would say should be a part of this boycott. I think that obviously we exist in a world where people are born in Israel and they experience Palestinian food and they experience being in community with Palestinian people. And there is room for people who are born in Israel and are experiencing Palestinian culture and appreciating it and loving it. But that room only exists if they are able to show up for Palestinian liberation and exist as allies and truly give credit where credit is due and truly honor and respect the traditions from which they are learning. And that's where that space exists. It just doesn't exist for people who want to take and appropriate and invisibilize. So I think that for people and consumers, that's where there is space for you to get engaged in Palestinian liberation on like a real-time consumptive level. I think that that also extends to Israeli brands, Israeli foreign-owned agricultural projects where ingredients like za'atar, tahini, olive oil, dates, oranges, lots of produce are being imported and subsequently also affecting Palestinian farmers. I think that, you know, there's a lot of lists out there, but if there's a restaurant that you go to that on the menu states that they sell an Israeli salad, feel free to go look up Israeli salad online and see Israeli food historians themselves talking about the origin of that salad as being a Palestinian peasant salad. And ask yourself, do you really need to eat at that restaurant? And if you do, I will send you a recipe for a Palestinian farmer salad that you can easily make yourself. But I'm going to pass the mic to Reem, who will take over. But yeah, that's a little bit of my informal call to culinary boycott.
You really summed it up very well. I don't think I could go after you saying I will send you a recipe. Yeah,
source.
I would add just one thing, sort of speaking. I can't speak for Amani, but I think she might resonate with this, is that it's just really tiring for Palestinians on our own to have to make the call outs. We need protection and we need coverage, and it's already uncomfortable for us. And so we ask for that discomfort, that you will get sometimes backlash, that the forces are real, and I don't want to undermine that, but I guarantee that you have a whole community around you that will make you more successful in taking, kind of, as Stephen sort of put it, be squarely aligned towards the moral authority, especially if you consider yourself anti-racist and pro-justice and pro-liberation. So yeah, it's just very tiring for us on our own to feel isolated, especially those of us who are in the public eye. And so that allyship just means so much, especially for folks in the food world. So I will hand it over to Stephen on that note.
So brilliant. Thank y'all so much. There are many different directions I think I could take to try to connect all of the powerful ideas from tonight. But as we've witnessed, I think there's great power in connecting our personal lived experiences to the universal. So I'm going to stick with that and name part of my experience as a young sommelier, as in my early 20s, having fallen in love with the world of wine. As a means of pleasure and indulgence, but also a means of connecting to history, connecting to place. And in those explorations, it became evident to me that it was not possible to be a conscious wine drinker and be a Black man from the South and not look at this relationship being foundationally and fundamentally about exploitation and colonization, which is about, among many things, the theft of land and life. I also saw in that work a call to bring my own politics to South Africa, where I could connect with my Black kin, indigenous kin, whose families have been on this land for many, 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 many generations, over a dozen generations, up to 20 generations in some cases, without any ownership, without any agency, born into circumstances in which the conditions of their lives are almost certain to not improve. And this being locked into society in ways that become, as we've said, normalized. And so it was really in connecting my relationship to wine as a sommelier to this movement for liberation in South Africa, to this work right now in Palestine. And what is required is that we need new stories. We need to make it so that Palestine is no longer a bad word. When the name of a place and a population of people who are oppressed becomes taboo to even mention in society, the society is ill. It's not the people who are being oppressed. And what's required with these stories is for us to be able to take back narrative power, and the narrative power that allows us to say, Palestine has a place in this liberation movement. And as Reem said, when Palestine gets free, we will all get free. I really believe that. So thank y'all. Thank you, AMC, catalyst for many of these great relationships. I love you all. I appreciate you all. I'm honored to be in this work. Thank you for thinking of me. And let's be in touch. Keep building, keep moving.